Hello and welcome. This talk is Individual Variation in Language Attitudes Toward Voice AI, the Role of Listeners' Autistic-like Traits by Michelle Cohn, Melina Sarian, myself, Kristin Predeck, and Georgia Zellou. And I'm going to start right now telling you a little bit about the background literature and the motivation for this paper. So prior research has shown that humans have strong beliefs and opinions of others based solely on their speech patterns. And these opinions can be about inherent cognitive and social characteristics of speakers, such as geographic region, gender, social class, and also native language. However, an open question is whether people attribute similar language attitudes to humans and to voice-activated artificially intelligent systems, so voice AI systems. And our scientific understanding of how people attribute social variables to voice AI is still very limited. So we were interested in uncovering a little bit more about that. And in our study, we examined human and voice AI language attitudes through the lens of computers as the social actors framework, the CASA framework, which posits that people automatically apply social behaviors from human-human interaction to their behaviors toward computers, given that a cue of humanity is expressed by the system. And some examples in line with the CASA framework include Nass and Lee in 2001, who found that participants perceive differences in personality, so whether a voice sounded introverted or extroverted across synthesized text-to-speech voices based on the acoustic parameters of those voices. Even fewer studies have made a direct comparison between both TTS and naturally produced human voices in the same study, but we think that such a comparison is really essential for evaluating predictions made by the CASA framework, because people might apply social rules from human-human interaction to interactions with technology, but it's possible that there is still a distinction between a real voice versus a voice AI. One study that looked at TTS voices versus human voices was Abdul Rahman and colleagues in 2019, and they found that a human voice was rated as nicer, less eerie, less supernatural, less terrorizing, and less shocking than a TTS voice. Also, Sharif and Lemoine in 2019 found that a human voice was rated as generating a stronger feeling of social presence and also behavioral intentions, while a TTS voice received lower trust ratings. An additional consideration that we took is whether computer personification responses might vary across individuals. Individual variation in behavioral responses to human speech is well attested. So there are differences across people within the same age, within the same social group, and within the same region in how speech patterns are perceived. Another factor is that variation across listeners has also been linked to individuals' differences in their cognitive processing style in both human-human and also in human-device interactions. So for example, Lee in 2010 found that the extent to which participants responded positively to a computer's flattering praise varied as a function of their cognitive style. So individuals with a less analytical and more intuition-driven style were more greatly affected by the computer's flattery in comparison to those with a less analytical style. Also, Snyder, Cohn, and Zellou in 2019 found that participants' subconscious vocal entrainment behavior toward human and Siri voices varied based on their cognitive processing style, measured by the autism quotient, or the AQ. And that brings us to our next point. Given that one of the primary characteristics for individuals with more autistic-like traits is a deficit in emotion perception, presenting participants with emotionally expressive stimuli is one way to further probe the social nature of these interactions and also emphasize possible sources of the more subtle individual variation. So the Amazon Alexa US English Voice has so-called speech cons. Those are words and phrases that have been recorded in a hyper-expressive manner by the voice actor. And prior work suggests that participants respond positively to these emotionally expressive productions by voice AI, displaying more vocal entrainment toward emotionally expressive interjections by Alexa, and also rating interactions with an Alexa social bot more highly if it did contain those. So that brings us to our first research question, which was whether participants would display sociolinguistic attitudes toward TTS voices. And our second research question was whether this might vary based on the cognitive traits of the individual user. And we predicted that differences based on AQ will manifest in different social judgments of Alexa and human voices who use emotionally expressive speech. So therefore, in the present study, we exposed participants to these same emotionally expressive interjections to further increase possible variation in responses based on AQ. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Melina, and she will walk you through the methods.
Our stimuli consisted of 24 interjections, such as wowza, darn, awesome, produced in two different conditions, neutral and expressive prosodies. The neutral and expressive Alexa productions were generated using the Alexa Skills Kit. For the human voice, a female native English speaker, age 25, was recorded producing the same set of interjections in an emotionally neutral or expressive manner. The speaker did not imitate the Alexa voice. The recordings were made in a sound attenuated booth while the speaker wore a head-mounted microphone. I'll be showing some example stimuli that subjects interacted with in a later slide. There were 34 participants in total, 21 males and 13 females with a mean age of 20 years old. They were recruited from the UC Davis Psychology Subjects Pool. They were introduced to the two talkers, Melissa and Alexa, with corresponding images and did an interactive task with the talkers. Here are some examples of the words they heard and interacted with. For Alexa,
awesome. Awesome.
and now Melissa, the human voice,
Awesome. Awesome.
After, participants rated the two talkers, human and Alexa, on 6 traits: professionalism, likability, attractiveness, intelligence, human-like, and perceived age. They did this on the computer and used a dragging scale to pick their numerical rating from 0 to 100 for each category. On the screen, you can see what the questions the participants saw and responded to. So for instance, in the professional category, you see the question, how professional did Alexa or Melissa sound? And they have 0, which is not professional, to 100, which is extremely professional. Finally, participants completed the AQ questionnaire, which included questions such as, if I try to imagine something, I find it very easy to create a picture in my mind. And they picked from definitely agree, slightly disagree, and definitely disagree. Now that I went over the methods, my colleague, Michelle, will go over the analysis and results with you.
Great, thanks. So let's go through the analysis. So first we coded the responses as binomial data for AQ. So 1 meaning more autistic-like and 0 meaning less autistic-like. Here we observed variation in participants' overall scores with a maximum of 50. Here we see a range between 8 and 31. Again, 31 meaning more autistic-like. The average around 17 and standard deviation about 5. We modeled each rating in a separate linear mixed effects model with the fixed effect of talker. So we have our Alexa and our human voice, AQ score, continuous, again up to 50, and their interaction, and by subject random intercepts. So note that more complex random effect structures didn't allow the model to converge. All right, so let's get started. The first one we're going to look at is age. So here we found a main effect of talker, where they rated the Alexa voice as sounding older than the human voice. You can see that in the figure here. Alexa in blue and the human in green. There was no effective AQ and no interaction of talker by AQ. Next, likability. So here we also saw an effective talker. So participants judged the Alexa voice as more likable than the human speaker overall. We didn't see an effective AQ, but we did see an interaction with AQ. So just to orient you before we show you the data, so this is AQ on the x-axis, likability score on the y. And here we can see different patterns for the human and Alexa voice. So with increasing AQ scores, we see more distinct ratings, so this gets wider, higher for the human and lower for the Alexa. For human-like, we didn't see an effect by talker or AQ, but just as with likability, we saw an interaction. Here, increasing with human and decreasing for Alexa. Again, put another way, both human-like and likability show more distinct ratings for human and Alexa with a higher AQ score. For the other three, attractiveness, intelligence, and professionalness, we didn't see any effects. So there were no differences between the human and Alexa, no variation based on AQ score, and no interaction between them. For all of them, the intercept was higher than 50. So remember, the sliding scales go from 0 to 100. So anything higher than 50 means that they are perceiving a little bit of that quality in that voice. And here we see that they perceive the voices as attractive, intelligent, professional. So they're perceiving those qualities in the voices, but just not in ways that are different by the two categories or by AQ. Overall, these findings suggest that listeners extract subtle personality and even age-related cues for TTS voices. So this is really in support for CASA, the Computers Are Social Actors framework. Humans are applying social labels and attitudes towards voice AI that are, in some cases, very similar across the interlocutors. So for example, attractive, intelligent, professional was really the same. We also saw some patterns of variation within some of the ratings. So individuals with more autistic-like traits were more likely to provide those distinct ratings for human and Alexa voices, again, for likability and human-likeness. We can see that again here. But contra kind of our predictions, this was higher for the human voices. So this kind of counters other work that's shown that people with more autistic-like traits tend to gravitate towards technology over humans. So part of that may be the emotionality in these stimuli. And since we had them all intermixed, it's difficult to tease that apart at this stage, but that may have been a factor here. Also important to note that AQ is not a clinical measure, so this isn't a population with autism. So these are just regular college students who came into the lab and filled out our questionnaire. So that's important to note. So it may be that we see these different patterns for a non-clinical population. Okay, so there are many limitations and future directions that we're really excited about with this work. So for one, we only used 2 voices and 1 from each category. So future work, including more examples for human voices and other voice AI, for example, including Siri voices, Google Assistant voices, can really tease apart if this is a category difference or really just dependent on those particular voices. Also considering other sources of variation, so gender, for example. As I mentioned, this is in a clinical population, and future work exploring emotionality or emotionally expressive productions compared to neutral productions in separate blocks would be helpful to see if that's maybe why we see the effects for likability and human likeness that we didn't initially predict. So overall, we see patterns of individual variation in how individuals perceive TTS, text-to-speech, versus human voices. And this furthers our understanding of human-computer dynamics, which is increasingly more important as voice AI systems like Alexa become more widespread. So thank you, and that's all.